Welcome to the channel. I know many of you listen to these videos to relax or fall asleep, and I'm really glad you're here. Before we start today's crime stories, please take a moment to subscribe if you haven't already. And if there's any crime story you'd like me to narrate for you, feel free to request it in the comment section. Now let's begin. Story 1. Manfred Adolf Seal was born on October 30th, 1946, in a town called Kronberg im Taunus. This town is in the state of Hesse, which was part of West Germany after the war. He was the only child of his parents. Growing up as an only child, he spent a lot of time by himself, but to people who knew him only a little, he seemed like a normal boy. When Manfred was about 11 years old, in 1957, he began attending secondary school in a nearby town called Oberursel. He was not a bad student, but he was not exceptional either. He did his work and moved through the school system like most other children. After he finished his basic schooling, he needed to learn a trade. He decided to become a chemographer. This is a skilled job where you prepare images and text for printing. He started an apprenticeship at a large printing company in Frankfurt called George Stritt. The company was located on a big street called Mainzer Landstrasse. This was his first real step into the adult world of work, and he learned to be precise and careful with his tasks. In 1967, when he was 21, Manfred had to fulfill his duty to the country. He began his compulsory military service, which lasted for 2 years. He was assigned to the Rocket Artillery Battalion 52. He was stationed at the Steuben Barracks in the city of Gießen. The military is a very structured environment. It requires discipline and following orders. Manfred learned to function within this system. He served his time and was discharged in 1969. After the military, Manfred decided to continue his education. He wanted to get a higher degree called an Abitur, which would allow him to go to university. He achieved this goal, and in 1973, he enrolled at the Goethe University in Frankfurt. He chose to study art and social history. These are subjects that require thought and interpretation, but they are not practical subjects like engineering or medicine. He attended classes and was part of university life, but he never finished his studies. He left the university without getting a degree. The same year he started university, 1973, was also the year he got married. He married a woman, and they began their life together. On the surface, this made him seem like a settled, normal young man. He had a wife, he had been to university, and he had a skilled trade. His wife later gave birth to their only child, a daughter, in 1979. To the outside world, Manfred Seal was a family man. He lived a quiet life in a house, first in Kronberg and later in a place called Schwalbach. He had a steady job, a wife, and a child. To his neighbors in Schwalbach, Manfred seemed like a friendly and unremarkable man. He would wave hello. He was polite. He did not cause any trouble that people could see. However, some people noticed that he could change suddenly. Occasionally, he would have angry outbursts. These were not frequent, but they were surprising coming from a man who was usually so calm. People might have thought he just had a bad temper sometimes. In the early 1990s, Manfred began to develop a secret habit that some people in the city noticed. He would regularly visit the red light district in Frankfurt. This is an area with many bars and prostitutes. He was seen there often. One time, a prostitute he was with had a very bad experience. She felt that he was abusive and violent. She was scared enough to contact a special helpline that was set up for sex workers in the area. She told them about what Manfred had done and warned them that other women should be careful around him because of his violent behavior. This was a clear warning sign, but it was a private call to a helpline, not a report to the police. In 1996, Manfred's life showed another crack in his normal appearance. He had been drinking too much alcohol for some time. It became a problem that he could not control on his own. He decided to check himself into a special clinic in a town called Urbach im Odenwald. This was a rehabilitation clinic for people who were addicted to alcohol. He stayed there for a while to try to get sober. This shows that he had a problem with drinking, a personal struggle that he tried to fix. Manfred continued to live his double life. To his family, he was a husband and father. To his neighbors, he was a friendly, quiet man. But in secret, he was visiting prostitutes, and at least one of them had reported him for being abusive. His wife remained with him throughout this time. She stayed married to Manfred until she passed away in 2013. His daughter grew up and became an adult, living her own life. In 2013, Manfred was given terrible news. He was diagnosed with cancer of the esophagus. This is a very serious and often fatal disease. He began treatment, but the cancer was too strong. A year later, on August 26, 2014, Manfred Adolf Seal died. He was 67 years old. To everyone who knew him in his daily life, he was just a man who had lived, worked, married, raised a child, and died. There was no reason to think anything else. A few weeks after his death, his daughter and her partner had the sad task of cleaning out his properties. One of these was a garage he had rented on Nordstrasse in Schwalbach. It was a simple garage where he kept things. When they opened it and began to look through the items stored there, they found a blue plastic bin. When they opened the bin, they made a shocking discovery that would completely change how the world saw Manfred Seal. A few weeks after Manfred Seal was buried, his daughter and her partner began the difficult work of clearing out the places where he had lived and stored his belongings. They went to a garage he had rented on Nordstrasse in the town of Schwalbach. It was a plain, ordinary garage, the kind where people keep old furniture, boxes, and tools. They opened the door and started to look through the items inside. Among the clutter, they noticed a large, blue plastic bin. They opened it to see what was inside. What they found was not old clothes or household items. Inside the bin were human body parts. They were in an advanced state of decay. There were feet and parts of thighs. The discovery was so shocking and terrible that they immediately called the police. This discovery was the beginning of a massive investigation. The police quickly identified that the body parts belonged to a woman. She was later identified as Britta Simone Diallo. She was 43 years old. Britta was a woman who had a difficult life. She was a sex worker, and she did not have a permanent home. She was last seen alive in the autumn of 2003, almost 11 years before her remains were found. Because she had no fixed address and lived on the margins of society, no one had reported her missing. The police now had a body, or at least parts of one, and they had a suspect, Manfred Seal, a man who was already dead. The examination of Britta Diallo's body revealed the extreme violence she had suffered. The injuries were not simple. They showed a pattern of brutal and methodical torture. The killer had used a handsaw to cut off her arms and legs. The medical examiners could not say for sure if she was alive when this happened, but they could not rule it out either. It was possible she was still conscious while her limbs were being severed. In addition to this, there were 8 nails driven into her body. They were found in the area of her knees, her pelvis, her breasts, and in her vaginal area. Her body also had many stab wounds and cuts. The level of cruelty was extreme. The police investigator, Frank Hermann, said that this act seemed like the peak of Seal's violent sexual desires. The police immediately formed a special task force to investigate Manfred Seal. They called it the Alaska Working Group. This nickname came from Seal himself. People who knew him said he loved to travel to Alaska. He also had a habit of wearing fur clothing, even in warm seasons, which made people think of the cold northern place. The police began to look into every part of his life. They searched his house in Schwalbach. In the basement, they found a number of computers. On the hard drives of these computers, they discovered a massive collection of violent pornography. It was 5 terabytes of data, filled with images and videos of extreme sexual violence. These images showed a specific interest in torture, mutilation, and control. As the police studied these images, they saw a connection to the body of Britta Diallo. Some of the poses and the types of injury shown in the pornography were very similar to what had been done to her. The police even found a manga comic book that belonged to Seal. They believed the images in this comic may have been used as a kind of template or inspiration for the way he tortured and killed his victims. It became clear to the investigators that Seal was not a man who killed once in a moment of rage. He had deep, planned, and sadistic sexual fantasies, and he had acted on them. The police then started to look at other unsolved murders in the Frankfurt-Rhein-Main region, some going back many years. They found several cases of women who had been killed in ways that matched a pattern. This pattern was like a signature left by the killer. All of the women they now linked to Seal had been strangled. After death, or possibly before, the killer had mutilated their bodies in specific ways. He often removed body parts, especially from the breasts and the pubic area. He also sometimes removed organs. The police investigator noted that if you looked at all the victims, one might have a leg missing, another an arm. He said it was as if the killer was collecting pieces to try and assemble a new body. One of the earliest possible victims was a 19-year-old woman named Gudrun Ebel. She worked as a cleaner and helped care for the elderly. Her body was found on February 6, 1971. She was discovered in a garden shed in a town called Bad Vilbel. Her lower abdomen had been cut open with a knife, and her uterus had been removed. The police believed the killer had shown sadistic behavior even this early. Another woman, Hadise Erolkaroglu, was found in April of the same year, 1971. She was 23 years old and worked as a geriatric nurse. She had been attacked on a bridge. She suffered massive injuries to her head, and her genital area had been mutilated. There was a possible connection between Hadise and Seal because Seal had trained and worked near a retirement home where she may have also worked or visited. The police then looked at a murder from 1991. The victim was Gisela Singh. She was 36 years old. Gisela was addicted to heroin and was HIV positive. She worked as a prostitute in Frankfurt. She was last seen on June 14, 1991, at a drug counseling center. 14 days later, mushroom pickers found her body in the Hofium forest. It was hidden under brushwood in a parking lot. Her body was badly decayed. She had been strangled, and her abdomen and thighs were mutilated. In her handbag, police found a train ticket. They also looked for a man named Hans, who was one of her regular customers. Later, they learned that Seal had been one of the men who visited her. In 1993, another woman was killed. Her name was Dominique Monrose. She was 32 years old and from the island of Martinique. She was homeless, addicted to drugs, and worked as a prostitute. She was last seen alive on December 3, 1993. Her torso was found in a garbage bag on a street called Friedberger Landstrasse. Her head had been cut off with a knife. Other parts of her body were found in plastic bags at different locations near a highway intersection. The police believed the killer had kept her torso in a freezer for about 10 days after the murder. This would have allowed him to take his time and cut up the body whenever he wanted. There was also the case of Pia Isabel Haim. She was 27 years old and worked as a bank employee. She suffered from mental illness and took medication for schizophrenia. She disappeared in July 1996. Her severed head was later found in a small garden in a part of Frankfurt called Sachsenhausen. The police considered her a possible victim of Seal. In 2004, before Seal died, another discovery was made. On April 4, 2004, the skeletonized head of a woman was found wrapped in aluminum foil. It was discovered inside a dam in a town called Offenbach. No other parts of her body were ever found. The police did not know who she was. They made a reconstruction of her face, but no one ever identified her. She was known only as the Frankfurt Jane Doe. As the police investigation continued, they realized the scope of what Manfred Seal had done. They believed he had been active from at least 1971 until 2004. In that time, they suspected he had killed at least 5 women. Most of his victims were drug-addicted sex workers. These women were easy to approach on the street. They were also at high risk because their disappearances often went unnoticed for a long time or were never reported at all. No one came looking for them. The police also considered the possibility that Seal did not act alone. In the case of some victims, the injuries were so extreme and the way the body was handled was so complex that they thought it might have required 2 people working together. This was just a theory based on the evidence at the crime scenes. They could not prove it, but they could not rule it out either. The investigators also spoke to criminal psychologists to try and understand why Seal did these things. They learned that men like Seal often see their victims not as people, but as objects. They use these objects to act out their violent fantasies and to feel powerful. The humiliation and control over another person is a major source of pleasure for them. Taking body parts as trophies allows them to relive the crime and keep feeling that sense of power long after the murder is over. The evidence against Manfred Seal was mounting, but the main suspect was dead. He had died of cancer a few weeks before his daughter opened that blue plastic bin. The police had the body of Britta Diallo. They had the computers filled with violent images. They had a long list of unsolved murders with the same terrible signature. But they could not arrest him. They could not put him on trial. They could only investigate the life he had left behind and try to find out just how many women he had killed. The Special Task Force, Working Group Alaska, began a detailed and systematic review of every cold case that fit the pattern. They asked the public for help, hoping that someone who had known Seal or had seen him with a woman might come forward with information. They were not just looking for bodies. They were looking for surviving victims, women who had been with him and lived to tell about it. These women could provide crucial details about his methods, his tricks, and his lies. The investigation was just beginning to uncover the full horror of what the friendly, quiet man from Schwalbach had done in the shadows for more than 3 decades. The discovery of Britta Diallo's body parts in the blue plastic bin was the event that started everything. It was a clear and direct link to Manfred Seal. The police could now connect a real, physical victim to the man who had seemed so ordinary. This single discovery in a rented garage in Schwalbach forced the authorities to look at Manfred Seal in a completely new way. They no longer saw a retired man, a widower, a neighbor. They saw a possible serial killer. The Special Task Force, Working Group Alaska, began its work in earnest. The first and most important piece of evidence was Britta Diallo herself. Forensic scientists examined her remains in great detail. They documented every wound, every cut, every nail. They confirmed the cause of death was not from the dismemberment alone, but from the extreme violence and torture she had endured. The pattern of her injuries was so specific that it became the key to understanding Seal's methods. The 8 nails driven into her body, the severing of her limbs with a saw, the stab wounds, these were not random acts of violence. They were a ritual. The next major step was the examination of Seal's computer hard drives found in his basement. The 5 terabytes of data were a window into his mind. The images and videos were not just pornography. They were a catalog of his fantasies. Investigators spent months reviewing this material. They found that the violence depicted in the videos closely matched the injuries on Britta Diallo. The poses, the focus on specific body parts, the use of tools, it was all there. This digital evidence proved that Seal's crimes were not impulsive. They were planned and rehearsed in his mind, fed by the violent material he consumed. With this profile of violence, the task force began to review unsolved murder cases from the past. They created a list of criteria based on the evidence from Britta Diallo and the computer files. They looked for cases where women had been strangled. They looked for cases where the body had been mutilated in the genital area or the breasts. They looked for cases where body parts had been removed. They looked for cases in the Frankfurt-Rhein-Main region, where Seal had lived and worked his entire life. The first cases they re-examined were the oldest. The murder of Gudrun Ebel in 1971, with her uterus removed, fit the pattern. The murder of Hadise Erol in the same year, with her genital area mutilated, also fit. These cases were decades old. The evidence was old and degraded. There was no DNA technology at the time of these murders. But the behavioral evidence, the signature of the killer, was a match. The task force could not prove Seal killed these women with forensic science, but they could see his hand in the way they were killed. The case of Gisela Singh from 1991 provided a stronger link. Witnesses had described a middle-aged suitor named Hans, who drove a blue Opel Rekord. When investigators looked into Seal's life, they found that he fit this description. He was the right age. He drove a similar car. And most importantly, they learned that Seal had been one of Singh's regular customers. This was a direct connection between Seal and a victim. The mutilations on Singh's body matched the pattern. The strangulation matched. It was another piece of the puzzle. The murder of Dominique Monrose in 1993 added another layer of understanding. The fact that her torso had likely been kept in a freezer showed the killer's need to control the body over time. It was not just about killing. It was about possessing the victim even after death. This fit with the psychological profile being developed by experts. Criminal psychologists explained that killers like Seal see their victims as objects. By keeping parts of them, they can continue to feel the power and excitement of the murder long after it is over. The freezer was a way to extend the experience. The discovery of Pia Isabel Haim's severed head in 1996 and the unidentified woman's head in 2004 showed that Seal's methods did not change over the years. He continued to target women, to kill them by strangulation, and to remove and keep body parts. The heads were the ultimate trophy. They held the identity of the victim. By taking the head, the killer was taking the person's very self. As the investigation progressed, the police also looked into other high-profile cases. One was the murder of a 13-year-old boy named Tristan Brubach in 1998. The boy had been killed in an underpass. His shoes had been placed neatly next to his body. This detail was similar to the Gisela Singh case, where items had been arranged near her body. For a time, Seal was considered a suspect in the boy's murder. However, after a thorough review, including fingerprint analysis, the police were able to exclude him. In October 2017, they officially stated that Manfred Seal was not a suspect in the Tristan Brubach case. This showed that the investigation was careful and methodical. They did not simply blame Seal for every unsolved crime. They used evidence to include or exclude him. The task force also investigated the disappearances of other women. They looked at Juliana Schroeder, an 18-year-old drug-addicted prostitute who disappeared in 1998. They looked at Gabrielle de Haas, a 32-year-old drug-addicted prostitute who disappeared in 1999. Her body was never found. They looked at Christine Goldhagen, a woman who went missing from Essen in 2000, but who also worked in Frankfurt's red light district. In each of these cases, the women fit the profile of Seal's victims. They were vulnerable. They worked on the streets. They disappeared without a trace. The police could not prove Seal killed them, but they could not rule it out. These women remained missing, and Seal remained the prime suspect in their cases. The investigation faced a major problem from the start. The main suspect was dead. They could not question him. They could not search his home while he was alive. They could only work with what he had left behind. This meant the case would never go to trial. There would be no verdict of guilty or not guilty. The police could only build a case based on the evidence and present their findings to the public. Another challenge was the age of the evidence. Many of the murders happened in the 1970s, 1980s, and 1990s. Forensic science was not as advanced then. DNA evidence, if it existed at all, was often degraded or contaminated. The police tried to get DNA from the victims' clothing and from the crime scenes. They compared it to DNA they could get from Seal's belongings. In some cases, the results were unclear. In others, there was simply no DNA to test. This made it difficult to get a definitive scientific link between Seal and some of the victims. The police also explored the possibility of a second offender. In the Britta Diallo case, the injuries were so extreme and the disposal of the body so complex that some investigators believed one man could not have done it alone. They looked for evidence of another person. They examined the forensic traces from the crime scenes. They interviewed people who knew Seal. They asked if he had any close friends or associates who might have helped him. By the end of the investigation, they could neither prove nor rule out the existence of an accomplice. This question remained unanswered. As the months passed, the Working Group Alaska continued its work. They appealed to the public for information. They released details about Seal's life. They showed his picture. They asked for anyone who had survived an attack by him to come forward. They hoped that a living victim could provide the clearest picture of his methods. A few people did come forward with stories, including the prostitute who had called the helpline years before, but no one who could provide the level of detail the police needed about the murders themselves. The investigators also studied Seal's life for clues about when he might have stopped killing. They noticed a gap in the timeline. After the early 1990s, the number of possible victims seemed to decrease. The last possible victim linked to him was the unidentified woman in 2004. Psychologists suggested that major life changes can affect a killer's behavior. Seal had married and had a child. He had periods of stability. He also had problems with alcohol and went to rehab in 1996. These events may have interrupted his killing. He may have been in a psychologically stable phase for a time, unable or unwilling to act on his violent urges. But the 2004 case showed that the urge never fully went away. By late 2017, the investigation had reached its limits. The Special Task Force, Working Group Alaska, was officially dissolved. The intensive, large-scale search for victims and evidence was over. The case was not closed, but it was no longer an active, full-time investigation. It was handed back to the regular Homicide Commission. This meant that if any new evidence came to light, the police would look at it. But the main work of linking Seal to the murders was done. The final conclusion of the investigation was that Manfred Seal was a serial killer. The police stated publicly that they believed he was responsible for at least 5 murders between 1971 and 2004. They believed he may have been responsible for more. They also concluded that he was likely only active in the Frankfurt-Rhein-Main area. They found no evidence linking him to similar crimes in other parts of Germany or Europe. This made him a local predator, a man who hunted in the area where he lived his entire life. The case of Manfred Seal became one of the most extraordinary in the history of the German police. The violence he used was described as beyond anything the lead investigators had ever seen. He was compared to the infamous Jack the Ripper, and the media gave him nicknames like the Hesse Ripper and Jack the Ripper of Schwalbach. But unlike Jack the Ripper, Manfred Seal was identified. He was named. His life was laid bare for the public to see. The story of Manfred Seal also had an impact beyond the police investigation. A German author named Andreas Gosling wrote a thriller called Wolfswit that was based on Seal's crimes. Another well-known author, Nele Neuhaus, announced that she was inspired by the case for one of her own books. The crimes of the quiet man from Schwalbach entered the world of popular culture, ensuring that his name would be remembered, even if only as a figure of horror. For the families of the victims, the investigation brought some answers, but not complete closure. For the family of Britta Diallo, they now knew what had happened to her, even if it was 11 years too late. For the families of Gudrun Ebel and Hadisi Aralkaraglu, killed so many years ago, they now had a possible explanation for the brutal deaths of their loved ones. But for the families of women like Gabrielle de Haas and Christine Goldhagen, whose bodies were never found, there was only uncertainty. They knew who the prime suspect was, but they did not have a body to bury. They did not have final proof. Manfred Seal never faced a judge. He never sat in a courtroom while victims' families looked at him. He never heard a verdict of guilty. He died in his bed of cancer, surrounded by the secret life he had built for decades. The justice system could not punish him. The only justice that could be served was the truth. The police investigation uncovered that truth. It showed that the friendly neighbor, the family man, the quiet retiree, was also a torturer and a killer. It showed that for over 30 years, he had preyed on the most vulnerable women in his community, and he had gotten away with it until the day he died. The blue plastic bin in the garage on Nordstrasse in Schwalbach was the key that unlocked the truth about Manfred Seal. It was a truth that his daughter never expected to find when she began the sad task of cleaning out her father's things. It was a truth that shocked an entire country. And it was a truth that, in the end, could only be told after the man himself was gone, leaving behind only the silent evidence of his crimes and the grieving families of the women he destroyed. Story 2. Werner Niesek was born on November 17, 1946, in the city of Salzburg, Austria. His mother was not married when he was born. In those years, this was very unusual and difficult for a woman. Because of this, Werner started his life with a disadvantage. Werner never met his father. His father was not part of his life, and Werner grew up without a father figure. This meant that from the very beginning, his mother had to raise him alone, with no help. As a young boy, Werner was difficult to manage. His mother worked hard to take care of him, but she was overwhelmed. She did not have the energy or the skills to control him. Werner began to show problem behaviors when he was still a youth. He did not like to follow rules. He started skipping school. He did not want to be in class, so he would stay away. This caused him to fall behind in his education. Soon, skipping school was not his only problem. Werner also began to steal things. He would take money or items that did not belong to him. He also started running away from his home. He would leave and not tell his mother where he was going. These were clear signs that something was wrong, but at the time, his mother could not find a way to stop him. When Werner was about 16 years old, his mother reached a point where she felt she could no longer handle him. She was tired and did not know what else to do. She told Werner that he needed to move out of the house. She wanted him to find his own place to live and take care of himself. When Werner heard this, he became very angry. He did not want to leave. In his anger, he picked up a knife and stabbed his mother. He did not kill her, but he hurt her badly with the knife. After the attack, he did not stay to see what would happen. He took some money from the house and ran away. He left Austria and went to Germany, to the city of Hamburg. Werner was only 16 years old. He was in a new country with no plan. He did not stay free for long. The police in Hamburg found him and arrested him. Because he had committed a serious crime in Austria, the German authorities sent him back. He was extradited to Austria to face the consequences of stabbing his mother. In Austria, Werner was sent to a juvenile detention center. This is a kind of prison for young people. Because he was a minor, he was not sent to a regular adult prison. He was found guilty of attempted murder. He stayed in the juvenile detention center for 2 years. After those 2 years, when he was 18, Werner was released. He was supposed to start a normal life, but he did not. He went back to his old habits. He began committing burglaries again. He would break into places and steal things. His crimes became more violent. In 1973, Werner shot a woman. The woman was 73 years old. He did not kill her, but he injured her with the gun. This was a very serious crime. When he was caught for this, he went to court. In court, Werner's lawyers argued that he was not sane. They said he was mentally ill and could not be held fully responsible for his actions. The court accepted this. He pleaded insanity. Because of this, he was sentenced to 8.5 years in prison. He was sent to a regular prison this time. Werner spent many years inside the prison. He was there for most of the 1970s. In prison, he found ways to occupy his time. One thing he did was make illegal liquor. This means he made alcohol in secret, which was against the rules. He was able to sell this liquor to other prisoners or people on the outside. He made some money from this illegal activity. By the start of 1980, Werner had been in prison for a very long time. He was now 33 years old. The prison officials looked at his behavior. They thought he was behaving well. Because of his good behavior, they decided to let him out early. He was granted parole. This meant he could leave prison before his full sentence was finished, but he would have to follow rules and report to an officer. A few weeks before his official release date, the prison gave him a special permission. They let him leave for 3 days. This is called a leave. The purpose was for him to go out and look for a job. He was supposed to find work, so he would have something to do when he was finally free. He left Garson Prison for 3 days to find employment. At the time he was released on parole in early January 1980, Werner Nisek had a very long criminal record. Since he was 16 years old, he had been convicted of crimes 7 separate times. He had spent a total of 15 years of his life in prison. He had also spent 13 months in a workhouse, which is another type of correctional facility. He was a man who had spent almost his entire adult life locked up. Now he was free again. He had the money he had saved from making illegal liquor in prison. With this money, he went to Vienna. In Vienna, he bought a special kind of weapon. It was a gas pistol. This is a gun that fires gas, not bullets, but it can still be used to threaten or hurt people. He now had a weapon and some money. He was living in Austria, looking for his next move. On January 16, 1980, just a few days after his release on parole, Werner Nisek took action. He took the gas pistol he had bought in Vienna. He also had the money he had saved from making illegal liquor in prison. He decided to travel by train from Vienna to a different city. The city he chose was called St. Pölten. He did not know anyone there. He had no job waiting for him. He simply went there with a plan to commit a crime. When he arrived in St. Pölten, he needed a way to get around. He wanted to find a house to target. He came up with a false story to tell people. He decided to pretend he was a salesman. He told people he represented a company that sold carpets. This was his cover story. It gave him a reason to be in different neighborhoods and to approach houses. He found a taxi and told the driver to take him to a part of the city called Am Kupferbrunberg. This was a settlement with houses and villas. He had no specific address in mind. He was not looking for a particular person. He was just looking for a house that seemed like a good target. The taxi drove him to this area, and he got out. He walked through the streets until he came to a house on a road called Fuchsenkellergasse. It was a villa, a large and nice home. He decided this was the house he would enter. He did not know who lived there. He did not care. He broke into the house by forcing his way in through a window. He climbed inside. Inside the house, there was a man. His name was Walter Altrieder. Walter was 26 years old. He used a wheelchair because he could not walk. He was alone in the house at that moment. Werner Nisek found Walter in the house. He used his gas pistol to threaten Walter. He made Walter a prisoner in his own home. Walter could not run away or fight back because he was in a wheelchair. Werner held him there waiting. Later that evening, 2 women came home to the house. They were Walter's mother and sister. His mother was Gertrude Altrieder. She was 55 years old. His sister was Ingrid Altrieder. She was 24 years old. They walked into the house, not knowing that a stranger was inside. When they entered, Werner was waiting for them. He used his weapon and his presence to overwhelm them. He forced them both to the ground and tied them up. He bound them so they could not move. They were now all prisoners in their own hallway. Gertrude, the mother, did not know what this man wanted. She thought he was a robber. She believed he had broken in to steal their money and valuables. Because she thought this, she tried to give him what he wanted to make him go away. She told him about a check they had. It was a check for 20,000 shillings. She offered it to him, hoping he would take it and leave them alone. But Werner Nisek was not there for money. The check did not matter to him. He had a different purpose. A short time after the women arrived, he began to kill. His first victim was Walter. Walter was still in his wheelchair. Werner used his bare hands to strangle Walter. He squeezed Walter's neck until Walter stopped breathing. After Walter was dead, Werner dragged his body out of the wheelchair. He pulled the body and put it near Gertrude, the mother. He wanted her to see what he had done. Then he turned his attention to Gertrude. He did not kill her quickly. He tortured her first. He hurt her in different ways for a long time. He wanted her to feel pain and fear. After 3 hours of this torture, he finally killed her. He used a noose, a rope tied in a loop, to strangle her to death. Ingrid was the last one. She was the youngest. Werner kept her alive the longest. He abused her and tortured her for many hours. The exact time is not known, but it was between 7 and 11 hours. During this long period, he did terrible things to her body. He burned her with something, leaving many burn marks on her skin. He hit her, leaving welts and bruises. He only stopped when he finally strangled her to death as well. During the time Ingrid was being held captive, something happened. The telephone in the house rang. It was Ingrid's fiancé calling. He wanted to talk to her. Werner was there in the room with her. He let her answer the phone. Ingrid spoke to her fiancé. She sounded normal, but she was not. She told him she was in a hurry and had no time to talk. She told him she had to cancel a meeting they had planned. Then she hung up. She could not tell him what was really happening because Werner was right there, watching and listening. If she had said anything, he would have hurt her more. That phone call was her last chance to reach out to the outside world. In the house, there was also a cat. It was the family's pet. Werner killed the cat too. He did not leave any living thing in that house. After he had killed all 3 people and the cat, he was tired. He lay down on the floor or on a bed and went to sleep. He fell asleep next to the bodies of the people he had just murdered. There was one other person who lived in that house. She was a 21-year-old woman. She was a lodger, which means she rented a room from the Altrieder family. But she was not at home that night. She had planned to have the day off, but she had swapped shifts with a co-worker. Instead of being home, she was at work. Because she swapped her day off, she was not there when Werner broke in. This simple change in her schedule saved her life. The next morning, Werner Nisek woke up. He had 3 dead bodies in the house with him. He needed to do something with them. He found the keys to the family's car. It was a Mercedes-Benz. He opened the trunk of the car. One by one, he carried the bodies of Walter, Gertrude, and Ingrid out of the house and put them into the trunk. He closed the trunk and got into the car. He did not drive away to hide. Instead, he drove to a bank. He took the check that Gertrude had given him, the one for 20,000 shillings. He cashed it. He gave the check to the bank teller and received the money. Then he went on a shopping trip. He used the dead family's money to buy things for himself. Later that day, he drove the Mercedes to a town called Karlstetten. He stopped at a restaurant. He went inside and ordered a meal. While he was eating, he had a large amount of cash with him. He was spending money freely. Some people in the restaurant noticed him. They saw he was a quiet man who did not talk much. They also noticed something strange. He was wearing black gloves, and he kept them on the entire time he was eating his meal. He did not take them off once. This made people feel suspicious. They wondered why a man would eat with gloves on. They also wondered where he got all his money. While he was at the restaurant, Werner asked the staff a question. He wanted to know where the nearest entrance to the motorway was. He was planning his next move, probably to drive to another city. One of the employees at the restaurant thought this man was acting very strangely. The employee decided to do something. He wrote down the license plate number of the Mercedes that was parked outside. He then contacted the police, who in Austria are called the gendarmerie, and told them about the suspicious man in the car. The police received this tip. They decided to check on the address where the car was registered. They went to the Altrieder family's villa in St. Polten. When they arrived, they looked around the outside of the house. They found a broken window. This was a clear sign that something was wrong. They tried to contact the family, but no one answered. The 3 people who lived there were missing. The police realized this was a serious situation. They put out a nationwide alert for the Mercedes car and for the family. That night, just before midnight, a police patrol car was in the city of Salzburg. They were driving near an area called the Südtiroler Platz. They spotted the Mercedes. It was parked there. The police moved in and arrested the man who was with the car. That man was Werner Nisek. They took him into custody. Then they searched the vehicle. When they opened the trunk, they made a horrifying discovery. Inside the trunk were the bodies of Walter, Gertrude, and Ingrid Altrieder. They had been stuffed inside, one on top of another. The police had found the car, the suspect, and the victims all at once. When the police arrested Werner Nisek at the Südtiroler Platz in Salzburg, they did not yet know the full horror of what he had done. They had found the bodies in the trunk of the Mercedes. That was clear evidence that 3 people were dead, but they did not know how they died, why they died, or exactly what had happened inside the Altrieder home. The investigation began immediately to answer these questions. The police took Werner Nisek to a police station for questioning. At first, he did not want to talk. He sat in the interrogation room and said nothing. The officers asked him about the bodies. They asked him how he got the car. They asked him what happened to the Altrieder family. Nisek remained silent. He would not give them any information. The police did not stop their investigation while waiting for him to talk. They sent other officers to the Altrieder house in St. Polten. At the house, they found the broken window that Nisek had used to break in. Inside, they found a terrible scene. There was evidence of a violent struggle. There were ropes and bindings on the floor. There were signs that someone had been held there against their will. The house told a story of fear and pain. The police collected everything they could find. They took photographs. They looked for fingerprints. They gathered any piece of evidence that might explain what happened. After 2 days of being in custody, Werner Nisek changed his mind. He decided to talk. He sat down with the investigators and began to confess. He told them everything he had done. He explained how he had gone to St. Polten with no specific target. He told them he had broken into the house at random. He did not know the Altrieder family. He had never met them before. He chose their house by chance. When the investigators asked him why he did it, his answer was simple and cold. He said he did it out of a desire to kill. He told them that the murders were not for money. They were not for revenge. They were not because the family had done something to him. He killed them because he wanted to feel the experience of killing. The murders gave him mental satisfaction. This was his only reason. As he continued his confession, he revealed more details about his actions inside the house. He told them about Gertrude Altrieder and her heart condition. He said that during the time he was torturing her, he made her take her heart medication. He did this not because he cared about her. He did it because he wanted her to stay conscious. He wanted her to stay awake and aware so she could feel every moment of pain and fear. He wanted her to experience the full agony of what he was doing to her. Only after hours of this did he finally kill her. The police also learned about the dog. They discovered that the Altrieder family was not his first choice that day. Before he broke into their home, he had gone to another house. It was the house of a building contractor. He had gone to the door with a fake story. He pretended he was looking for the address of a doctor. But at that house there was a dog. The dog barked at him and acted in a way that scared him or made him change his mind. He decided not to enter that house because of the dog. He left and kept walking until he found the outrider home. If not for that dog, another family might have been his victims. After his confession, Nicek was held in a cell at the Salzburg Provincial Court. He was waiting for his formal charges and trial. While in that cell, he tried to kill himself. He attempted to take his own life. But the court officials were watching him closely. They stopped him before he could succeed. They made sure he stayed alive to face justice. The case was then prepared for trial. The prosecutors gathered all the evidence. They had his confession. They had the physical evidence from the house. They had the bodies and the autopsy reports. The autopsy reports showed the full extent of what Ingrid had suffered. Her body was covered with marks. There were welts from being hit. There were hematomas, which are large bruises caused by bleeding under the skin. And there were dozens of small burn marks all over her body. The medical examiners could see that she had been tortured for a very long time before she died. The trial of Werner Nicek took place on July 4th, 1980. It was held at the district court in St. Polten, the same city where the crimes had occurred. The courtroom was full of people who wanted to see justice done. The judges listened to all the evidence. They heard the details of the murders. They heard about his long criminal history. They heard about his confession. The court had to decide what to do with Werner Nicek. They knew he was not a normal criminal. He had a history of mental problems. He had pleaded insanity before. The doctors who examined him said he was mentally unstable. He was dangerous in a way that could not be fixed with regular prison. On that day, the court reached its decision. They found Werner Nicek guilty of 3 counts of murder. They sentenced him to life in prison. But that was not the only thing they did. They also ordered that he be sent to a special institution. He would not go to a regular prison. He would be admitted to an institution for the mentally unstable. This was a place for criminals who were too dangerous and too mentally ill to be kept with the general prison population. After the trial, Nicek was taken away to begin his sentence. But his story in the justice system did not end there. 3 years later, in 1983, he was being held at a place called Stein Prison. This was a very old and large prison in Austria. Despite being in a high-security facility, Nicek attempted to escape. He made a plan and tried to break out. But like his suicide attempt, this also failed. The prison officials stopped him. He was caught and remained in custody. The case of Werner Nicek had a large impact on the entire Austrian prison system. It was so shocking that the government had to respond. The Minister of Justice at that time was a man named Christian Broda. He held a press conference to talk about the case. He spoke about what had happened and why it was allowed to happen. Minister Broda explained that there was a problem with the law. In 1975, Austria had changed its laws about criminal insanity. The new law made it easier to send dangerous mentally ill criminals to hospitals instead of prisons. They could be kept there even after their prison sentences would have ended. This was meant to protect the public from people like Nicek. But there was a rule in Austria that new laws could not be applied to crimes that happened before the law was changed. This is called not applying laws retroactively. Because Nicek had committed his first crimes long before 1975, the new law did not apply to him. He was sentenced under the old system. This meant that even though everyone could see he was mentally ill and dangerous, he could not be automatically sent to a mental hospital for life under the new rules. He could only be sent there as part of his sentence. Minister Broda said that if Nicek had been convicted after January 1st, 1975, the triple murder might not have happened. He believed that if the new laws had applied to him, he would have been in a mental hospital and not free on parole. To fix this problem for the future, the government created a special working group. This group had 9 members. Their job was to look at all the prisoners in Austria. They had to find prisoners who had been sentenced under the old laws before 1975, but who would be considered mentally abnormal and dangerous under the new laws. These prisoners could not be sent to mental hospitals permanently because of the rules. But the working group made sure they were moved to special institutions for the rest of their sentences. This was a way to protect the public without breaking the law. The story of Werner Niesek and what he did to the Altruder family became one of the most famous and frightening crime stories in Austria. It showed how a broken childhood, a long history of violence, and a failure of the system could come together to destroy innocent lives. Years later, a filmmaker named Gerald Cargill made a movie called Angst. The movie was based directly on the crimes of Werner Niesek. It told the story of a killer who tortured and murdered a family in their own home. The film brought the story to an even wider audience and made sure that what happened to the Altruder family would not be forgotten. Werner Niesek remained in custody for the rest of his life, a symbol of the darkest kind of human violence and a reminder of the importance of laws designed to keep dangerous people away from society. The 3 members of the Altruder family lost their lives on a random night in January 1980, simply because a man with a long history of violence and a desire to kill chose their house to break into. Story 3. A baby boy was born on November 6, 1946, in a part of Germany that was still recovering from a big war. His mother was not married. She was very sick with a disease called tuberculosis. She could not take care of her baby. Just 5 months after he was born, his mother died from her illness. The baby became an orphan. He had no parents and no family to take him in. For the first months of his life, he was looked after by nurses in a home for children without parents. He was given the name Karl-Heinz Sadrzinski. When the baby was 11 months old, a couple decided to adopt him. The husband was a butcher. He and his wife lived in a town called Langenberg. They had no children of their own. They took the baby boy into their home and gave him a new name. They called him Jürgen Bartsch. For Jürgen, this was the start of a life that would be very difficult and full of pain. Jürgen's new mother was a very strict woman. She had a strong fear of dirt and germs. This is a mental problem called obsessive-compulsive disorder. For her, keeping things clean was the most important thing in the world. She was always cleaning her house. She was always washing. And she expected Jürgen to be perfectly clean at all times. Because of her fear of dirt, she would not let Jürgen play outside with other children. She was afraid he would get his clothes dirty or bring mud into the house. She was afraid he would touch things that were not clean. So Jürgen spent most of his time alone inside the house. He was not allowed to have friends. He was not allowed to run and play like a normal boy. He could only watch other children from his window. He was very lonely. His mother's control over him did not stop as he got older. She treated him like a much younger child. For example, she insisted on bathing him herself. She did this not just when he was a little boy, but all the way until he was 19 years old. These bathing sessions were not gentle. They were another way for her to control him and inspect him. Jürgen had no privacy and no freedom. When Jürgen was 10 years old, he finally started school. He was older than the other children in his class. Going to school was a new experience for him. He was not used to being around other kids. His parents watched how the school worked. They thought the teachers were not strict enough. They wanted a much harder and more disciplined place for Jürgen. So they decided to send him away to a Catholic boarding school. This was a school where children live. Jürgen had to leave his home and live at this new school. Life at the boarding school was also very hard. The rules were strict. The teachers were harsh. Jürgen did not fit in well with the other boys. He was quiet and had trouble making friends because he had spent his whole life alone. He felt different from everyone else. He was lonely at school, just as he had been lonely at home. When Jürgen was a baby, people who saw him noticed strange marks on his body. He often had scars and bruises. It was clear that someone was hurting him. He was being physically abused. This violence was a regular part of his young life. The worst place for Jürgen was the basement of his adoptive home. His father, the butcher, had his workshop down there. He cut up meat from cows and pigs on large tables. It was a place of blood and knives and hooks. Jürgen's mother would often beat him in this very room. She would hit him while he was surrounded by the tools of the butcher's trade. The violence and the setting became linked in his mind. Things got even worse for Jürgen as a child. For a period of time, when he was growing up, his parents kept him locked in the underground cellar. This was not just for a few hours as punishment. He was detained down there for 6 long years. He was cut off from the world, alone in a dark, cold space. As if the loneliness and the violence from his parents were not enough, other adults and older children hurt Jürgen in a different way. They abused him sexually. When Jürgen was only 8 years old, his 13-year-old cousin did things to him that should never happen to a child. It was a betrayal by someone close to him. Then, when he was 13 years old, one of his teachers at school abused him too. These were terrible experiences that confused and frightened him. He learned about sex through violence and force. By the time Jürgen was a teenager, his life had been shaped by nothing but pain. He was adopted by a mother who isolated him and controlled him. He was beaten frequently, often in a room filled with blood and butcher tools. He was locked alone in a cellar for years. He was sexually abused by a cousin and a teacher. He had no real friends. He had no love or kindness in his life. He was a deeply troubled and lonely young man. In the summer of 1962, Jürgen Bartsch was 15 years old. In the summer of 1962, Jürgen Bartsch was 15 years old. He lived in the town of Langenberg with his adoptive parents. Near his home, there was an old, abandoned air raid shelter. This was a large, dark, underground bunker left over from the war. It had several rooms and tunnels. It was damp, cold, and completely hidden from view. No one ever went there. For Jürgen, this dark and hidden place became very important. Jürgen had no friends. He was filled with anger and confusion from the years of abuse he had suffered. He had learned that the world was a place of violence and pain. He also had sexual feelings that he did not understand. They were mixed up with the violence he had experienced and the bloody setting of his father's butcher shop in the basement. He began to think about luring a young boy into the dark shelter. He wanted to have power over someone. He wanted to do the things to someone else that had been done to him. On March 31st, 1962, Jürgen put his plan into action. He saw an 8-year-old boy named Klaus Jung playing alone near the shelter. Jürgen approached him. He did not act mean or scary. He acted friendly. He told the boy that they could play a game inside the old bunker. Klaus trusted this older teenager and agreed to go with him. This was the first step in a chain of events that would lead to tragedy. Jürgen led Klaus deep into the dark shelter. Once they were inside, away from any light or help, Jürgen's behavior changed. He used his greater strength to overpower the small boy. He forced Klaus to take off his clothes. Then, Jürgen sexually abused him. The abuse was violent and confusing for the young child. After the abuse, Jürgen was faced with a problem. He was terrified that Klaus would tell his parents or the police. He felt he had to make sure the boy could never speak about what happened. To make sure the secret stayed hidden, Jürgen killed Klaus Jung. He then used tools, possibly like the ones he saw his father use in the butcher shop, to dismember the boy's body. He cut the body into pieces. After he finished, he hid the pieces in different places inside the dark, empty shelter. He left the boy's clothes there too. Then, he went back to his normal life, as if nothing had happened. No one reported Klaus missing right away, and no one found his body. For over 3 years, Jürgen kept this terrible secret. After killing Klaus, Jürgen stopped for a while. The fear of being caught was very strong. But as time passed, the urge to do it again grew inside him. He thought about the feeling of power he had in the shelter. He began to plan again. On August 6, 1965, Jürgen, now 18 years old, found his next victim. The boy's name was Peter Fuchs. He was 13. Again, Jürgen used a friendly and calm approach. He talked to Peter and convinced him to come into the abandoned air raid shelter. He might have said there was something interesting to see, or that they could explore the tunnels. Peter did not suspect any danger. Once they were deep inside the bunker, the same pattern happened again. Jürgen used force to make Peter undress. He then sexually abused him. Just like with Klaus, Jürgen then killed Peter to silence him. He used the same method to dismember the body and hid the remains inside the shelter. Peter Fuchs was gone, and no one knew where. His family was left not knowing what happened to their son. Only 8 days later, on August 14, 1965, Jürgen did it again. This time, his victim was a 12-year-old boy named Ulrich Karlweiss. The method was exactly the same. Jürgen approached the boy in a friendly way. He convinced him to follow him into the dark shelter. Inside, he overpowered him, made him undress, and sexually abused him. Then, he killed Ulrich and dismembered his body. He added the boy's remains to the hidden collection inside the bunker. The shelter was becoming a secret grave for multiple children. After killing 3 boys in a short period, Jürgen stopped again. Perhaps the fear returned, or perhaps he needed time to feel in control. But the pattern was set. Almost a year later, on May 6, 1966, he found another boy. The victim's name was Manfred Grassmann. He was 12 years old. Jürgen used the same trick. He spoke to Manfred in a friendly way and led him into the abandoned shelter. Inside, the same terrible sequence of events occurred: forced undressing, sexual abuse, murder, and dismemberment. Manfred's body was hidden with the others. Jürgen had now killed 4 boys over a period of 4 years. Each time, he used the same place and the same basic plan. The dark, empty shelter was his private, hidden world where he acted out his violent urges. He believed he was in complete control. He thought no one would ever find out about the bodies hidden in the dark tunnels. On June 18, 1966, Jürgen approached his 5th victim. This time, the boy was older. His name was Peter Fries, and he was 15 years old. Jürgen did not know that this older boy would be different. He used his usual method. He acted friendly and convinced Peter to come into the air raid shelter. Peter went with him, curious about the old bunker. Once they were deep inside, Jürgen attacked. He was strong, but Peter was also 15 and could fight back. However, Jürgen managed to overpower him. He forced Peter to take off his clothes. Then he tied Peter up so he could not move. He wanted to keep him alive for a while. After he had tied Peter up, Jürgen left the shelter for a short time. He might have gone to get something, or he might have left to see if anyone was nearby. This was a critical mistake. While Jürgen was gone, Peter did not give up. He was tied up, but he could move his hands a little. He looked around the dark room where he was being held. On the floor nearby, he saw a candle that Jürgen had left burning. Peter realized he could use the flame. He carefully moved his bindings into the candle's flame. The fire slowly burned through the ropes or cords that held him. It was painful and took time, but Peter kept working at it. Finally, the bindings broke. He was free. Peter Fries did not wait. He did not try to find Jürgen. He ran as fast as he could out of the dark tunnels and into the daylight. He ran all the way home, terrified. When he got there, he told his parents everything that had happened in the bunker. His parents listened to his story and immediately called the police. For the first time, someone had escaped from Jürgen Bartsch and lived to tell about it. The police received the report from Peter Fries and his family. They now had a description of a man who had attacked a boy in the old air raid shelter. They had a crime scene to investigate. They did not know it yet, but they were about to discover a hidden place of horror that would reveal the fate of 4 missing boys. Jürgen Bartsch did not know that his 5th victim had escaped. He did not know that the police were now on their way to the shelter that held all his secrets. When the police received the report from Peter Fries and his parents, they acted quickly. A team of officers was sent to the abandoned air raid shelter on June 18, 1966. They brought flashlights because the tunnels were completely dark. They went deep inside, looking for the place where Peter had been attacked. What the police found in the shelter shocked them. They did not find just one crime scene. They found evidence of multiple terrible acts. In the dark rooms and tunnels, they discovered human remains. They found pieces of bodies that had been hidden there for a long time. They also found clothing belonging to young boys. The shelter was not just a hiding place. It was a grave. The police immediately began a detailed search of the entire bunker. They worked carefully, collecting everything they could find. They gathered the remains and brought them out into the light. They also collected other evidence, such as ropes, tools, and personal items that had been left behind. It was a difficult and grim task. Over the next few days, they were able to determine that the remains belonged to 4 different boys. While the search was going on, other police officers began their investigation. They talked to Peter Fries again. He gave them a very clear description of the man who had attacked him. He described what the man looked like, how he talked, and how he had acted friendly to get him into the shelter. The police now had a face and a name to look for in the local area. They started asking questions around Langenberg. They asked if anyone knew a young man who spent time near the old bunker. It did not take long for the police to get a name. People in the town knew Jürgen Bartsch. He was the butcher's adopted son. He was a quiet young man who kept to himself. Someone might have mentioned seeing him near the shelter. The police looked into his background and learned he was 20 years old. They decided they needed to talk to him. When the police first spoke to Jürgen Bartsch, he did not run. He did not act nervous or guilty. He agreed to come to the police station for questioning. At first, he denied knowing anything about the crimes. He said he had never been inside the shelter. But the police had a lot of evidence. They had the remains of 4 boys. They had the testimony of a living victim, Peter Fries, who could identify him. They kept asking questions. Faced with the evidence, Jürgen Bartsch's resistance broke. He began to confess. He did not confess to just one crime. He confessed to everything. He told the police in detail about each of the 4 boys he had killed. He described how he had lured them into the shelter, abused them, killed them, and then cut apart their bodies. He also confessed to attacking Peter Fries. He spoke calmly and clearly, as if he was describing ordinary events. His confession was long and complete. He led the police back to the shelter and showed them exactly where he had hidden the remains of each victim. The investigation was effectively over. The police had their man, and he had told them everything. With the confession complete, Jürgen Bartsch was formally arrested and charged with 4 murders and 1 attempted murder. The case was prepared for trial. It was a case that shocked all of Germany because of the young age of the victims and the horrifying nature of the crimes. The trial of Jürgen Bartsch began in December 1967. It took place in the regional court in the city of Wuppertal. The courtroom was full of journalists and members of the public who wanted to see the young man who had done such terrible things. The families of the victims were also there, hoping for justice. During the trial, the court heard all the evidence. They heard from police officers who found the bodies. They heard from doctors who examined the remains. Most importantly, they heard from Peter Fries, who bravely told the court how he had escaped. They also heard Jürgen Bartsch himself repeat his confession. The facts of the case were not in doubt. Jürgen Bartsch had committed the crimes. However, something new and important happened at this trial. For the first time in German legal history, The court spent a great deal of time looking at the defendant's background. They brought in experts, including psychiatrists, to examine Jürgen Bartsch and explain why he had become a killer. These experts talked about his terrible childhood. They described the abuse, the isolation, the violence, and the sexual assaults he had suffered as a boy. They explained that his mind had been damaged by these experiences. He was not simply an evil person, they argued. He was a deeply sick person who had been shaped by cruelty from the very beginning of his life. This was a new idea in a German court. Normally, the court would only look at the crimes themselves and decide the punishment based on the law. But in this case, the judges listened carefully to the psychiatrists. They considered Jürgen Bartsch's psychosocial background, meaning how his psychology had been formed by his social environment and the abuse he suffered. This was a major turning point in the case. On December 15, 1967, the court in Wuppertal reached its verdict. They found Jürgen Bartsch guilty of murder. The punishment for murder at that time was life in prison. The judge sentenced him to life imprisonment. This was the expected outcome based on the law. Jürgen Bartsch was sent to a regular prison to serve his sentence. But the case did not end there. Jürgen Bartsch's lawyers appealed the decision. They argued that the life sentence was not appropriate because of his mental condition and his traumatic childhood. They took the case to a higher court, the Federal Court of Justice of Germany. This court looked at the case again. In 1971, they made a very important decision. They agreed with the lawyers. They sent the case back to a lower court, the regional court in Düsseldorf, to be decided again. They said the new court must fully consider Jürgen Bartsch's background when deciding his punishment. The court in Düsseldorf held a new hearing. They reviewed all the evidence again, especially the psychiatric reports. They came to a different conclusion than the first court. They decided that Jürgen Bartsch was not a cold, calculated murderer in the usual sense. They saw him as a deeply disturbed young person whose crimes were a direct result of the abuse he had suffered. Because he was only 20 years old when he was arrested, the juvenile justice laws could be applied. On July 20, 1971, the court in Düsseldorf announced its new sentence. They reduced his punishment from life in prison to 10 years of juvenile detention. This was a much shorter sentence, but the court added a very important condition. They ruled that Jürgen Bartsch must be placed in a secure psychiatric hospital, not a regular prison. He would stay there until doctors decided he was cured and no longer a danger to others. He would be a patient, not just a prisoner. Jürgen Bartsch was moved from his prison cell to the state hospital in Eichelborn. This was a large institution for people with mental illnesses and disabilities who had committed crimes. He would live there for an unknown amount of time, possibly the rest of his life, while doctors tried to treat him. Life in the hospital was different from prison. He had more freedom to move around, but he was still not free. He was under constant observation by doctors and nurses. The doctors at Eichelborn tried to help him. They talked with him for many hours. They tried different types of therapy to understand his mind and change his behavior. But Jürgen Bartsch remained a difficult case. He often fell into deep sadness and depression. He did not seem to be getting better. After years of treatment, the doctors and Jürgen himself began to think about other options. They discussed the possibility of castration. This is an operation that removes a man's ability to produce male hormones. The doctors believed this might reduce his violent sexual urges and make him safe to release. It was a drastic and controversial idea. Jürgen Bartsch thought about it for a long time. He did not want the operation at first, but he also did not want to spend his whole life locked up in the hospital. He wanted to be free. He had even met a woman named Gisela Dyke while in the hospital, and they had gotten married on January 2nd, 1974. He dreamed of having a normal life with her outside the hospital walls. After years of thinking and discussing it with his doctors and his wife, he finally agreed to the castration. He believed it was his only chance to leave Eichelborn. The date for the surgery was set for April 28, 1976. It would be done at the hospital in Eichelborn. The doctors planned to use a type of anesthesia called halothane to put him to sleep during the operation. This was a common drug used for surgeries at the time. The procedure itself was not considered very dangerous. On the morning of April 28th, Jürgen Bartsch was prepared for the operation. He was taken to the operating room. The doctors and nurses who would perform the surgery were there. The anesthesiologist, the doctor responsible for putting patients to sleep, began to administer the halothane gas to Jürgen through a mask. Jürgen went to sleep, but something went terribly wrong. The doctors later determined that a critical mistake was made. The person giving the anesthesia gave Jürgen too much of the drug. The dose was far too high. In fact, it was 10 times the normal safe amount. Jürgen Bartsch's body could not handle this massive overdose. His heart and his breathing stopped. The doctors tried to revive him, but they could not. He never woke up from the surgery. Jürgen Bartsch was killed by a medical error on the operating table. He was 29 years old. An official investigation was immediately launched to find out what had happened. The doctors at the hospital had to explain how a routine surgery could end in death. The investigation confirmed the terrible truth. Jürgen Bartsch had died because of a mistake during the castration procedure. The halothane overdose was an accident, but it was a fatal one. The doctors who were supposed to help him had accidentally ended his life. The story of Jürgen Bartsch came to a sudden and unexpected end that day. The serial killer who had confessed to his crimes, who had been sentenced and then resentenced, who had spent years in therapy and even gotten married, was now dead. He died not by execution or by his own hand, but by the mistake of a doctor in the very hospital meant to cure him. For the families of Klaus Jung, Peter Fuchs, Ulrich Kahlweiss, and Manfred Grassmann, there was no final sense of closure from a trial or a long imprisonment. Their sons were gone, and the man who killed them was also gone, buried just like them. Peter Fries, the boy who escaped, lived on, carrying the memory of what happened in that dark shelter. Jürgen Bartsch's body was buried, and the case was finally closed, not in a courtroom, but in a hospital operating room. The boy who was born into a world of pain and abuse died because of a mistake, ending a story filled with tragedy from beginning to end. Story 4. Peter Lundin was born on February 15, 1972, at a hospital in Roskilde, Denmark. His father was Ole Bostrom Lundin, a Danish man who worked as a bricklayer. His mother was Anna Lundin. She was born in Germany. Ole and Anna met in West Germany after World War II. At that time, Ole was serving in the United States Army. After they got married, the couple moved to Denmark to start their life together. They settled down, and soon after, their only child, Peter, was born. When Peter was a young boy, the family lived in a town called Sarred Strand. His father, Ole, was a skilled builder. He used his skills to construct a house for his family on a street named Fuglsangs. For a time, life was normal. Peter went to school and played in the neighborhood. But this period of stability did not last. In 1979, when Peter was 7 years old, his father developed a serious health problem. He got a blood clot that left him unable to work as he had before. This was a major blow to the family. Because Ole could no longer work as a bricklayer, the family started to have money problems. They could not pay for their house. Eventually they lost it. The house was taken by the bank. Faced with this difficult situation, Ole decided to make a big change. He wanted to try for a new start in the United States. So, in 1979, Ole, Anna, and their 9-year-old son Peter left Denmark. They moved across the Atlantic Ocean to America. They first settled in Florida, in a town called Ormond Beach. They bought a house on a street named Essex Drive. To make a living, the family bought and ran a small motel. Peter had to adjust to a new country, a new language, and a new school. A few years later, in 1984, the family moved again. This time, they went to Maggie Valley, a town in the mountains of North Carolina. Ole bought a new house there. But the family problems did not end. Ole and Anna's marriage began to fail. A few years after moving to North Carolina, Ole decided to leave his wife. He took his teenage son, Peter, with him. Ole and Peter traveled around for a while. They first went to Los Angeles, California, and stayed there for a few weeks. Then they moved to New York City, and later to Boston. Their journey finally ended in Miami, Florida. In Miami, Ole found a small apartment and got work again as a bricklayer. Even though he had left Anna, he later decided to get back together with her. He brought her down from North Carolina to join them in Miami. By this time, Peter was 14 years old. He started attending a school in Miami. During his time as a teenager in Miami, Peter began to work at small jobs. He got a job as a waiter at a restaurant. On the very day he turned 16 years old, he made a decision. He decided to leave school. He did not want to study anymore. Instead, he went to work full-time with his father, learning the bricklaying trade. It was during this period, as a young man working with his father, that Peter was first introduced to drugs. He began to use cocaine and marijuana. However, this life in Miami did not last long. The family decided to move back to the house they still owned in Maggie Valley, North Carolina. Back in Maggie Valley, Peter went back to school at the local high school. It was here that he started a small business of his own. He began selling cannabis or marijuana to other students at his school. His life at home was also becoming very troubled. His parents, Ole and Anna, were both drinking too much alcohol. Their marriage was full of conflict. Peter and his father often got into violent fights with Anna. The situation became so bad that the neighbors who lived nearby called the police on more than one occasion. The police would come to the house, but they never filed any official reports or made any arrests. The violence inside the home continued without any outside help. Around the beginning of April 1991, a very serious event took place. Peter London was 19 years old. An argument started between Peter and his mother, Anna. The reason for the argument is believed to be about his hair. Anna wanted him to cut his long hair, and Peter did not want to. The argument became physical. Peter put his hands around his mother's neck and choked her. He choked her until she stopped moving. Anna London was dead. After his mother was dead, Peter went to his father. Together, father and son came up with a plan to hide the body. They put Anna's body into their car and drove east, toward the coast of North Carolina. They drove to a place called Cape Hatteras, a long strip of sandy islands. They went to a wide, empty beach near the town of Buxton. There, they buried her body deep in the sand. For about 7 months, the secret stayed buried. But on November 1st, 1991, some people were taking a walk on that same beach. They discovered the body of a woman that had been washed up from the sand. The body was wrapped in a blue blanket. It was covered in black plastic. The whole bundle was wrapped tightly with tape and a yellow rope. The police began an investigation to find out who the woman was and how she died. By this time, Peter and his father were no longer in North Carolina. They had fled to Canada, but the police investigation led to them. On June 6, 1992, police found them in a hotel room in the city of Toronto. They were both arrested. Peter was charged with the murder of his mother. Ole was charged with helping to hide the body. In July of 1993, Peter London stood trial in Dare County, North Carolina. He was found guilty of second-degree murder. The judge sentenced him to 20 years in prison. His father, Ole, was found guilty of being an accessory after the fact. He was sentenced to 2 years in prison. As part of their sentences, both were ordered to be deported back to Denmark as soon as they finished serving their time in America. Ole served his shorter sentence and was deported. Peter, however, did not want to accept his sentence. He appealed the decision, asking for a shorter term and to stop his deportation. In February 1995, he won a small victory. His prison sentence was reduced from 20 years to 15 years. But his request to stop the deportation was denied. He would still have to leave the United States when he was released. He served the rest of his time at a prison called Brown Creek Correctional Institution. While Peter was in prison in 1994, a journalist from a Danish television station named TV2 heard about his case. The journalist, Jesper Klitt, was working on a program about young Danes living in America. He wrote a letter to Peter in prison, asking if he would agree to be interviewed for the show. Peter said yes. The interview was filmed inside the prison. During the interview, Peter did something unusual. He used makeup to color one side of his face black and the other side white. He told the journalist that this was to show the two sides of his personality, good and evil. The documentary, called The American Dream, was shown on TV in Denmark on December 14, 1994. It made many people in Denmark aware of who Peter London was. In the United States, the prison system in North Carolina was facing a serious problem. There were too many prisoners and not enough space to hold them. Because of this, the state made a decision to shorten the sentences of many inmates who had been convicted before a certain date. This policy applied to Peter London. Because of this, he was released from prison after serving only about half of his 15-year sentence. On June 4, 1999, Peter London was flown back to Denmark. He was accompanied by 4 American police officers who handed him over to Danish authorities at Copenhagen Airport. When he arrived back in his home country, Peter was a free man. The Danish police had no outstanding warrants for him, so they let him go. While he was still in prison in America, Peter had been contacted by many Danish women who had seen him on television. He began writing letters to one of them, a woman named Tina. In 1996, while still serving his sentence, he had married her by proxy. So when he arrived in Denmark, he went to live with his new wife, Tina, and her teenage daughter from a previous relationship. They lived in an apartment in a town called Malov. This was the situation in the fall of 1999. In the fall of 1999, Peter London was living in the apartment in Malov with his wife Tina and her teenage daughter. But the new life in Denmark did not last long. Peter had a violent temper. One day, he got into a physical fight with his wife. He also attacked her daughter. The attacks were so severe that Tina made a decision. She told Peter to leave. She threw him out of the apartment. Peter had nowhere to go. He ended up moving into a place called the Men's Home in the Nørrebro district of Copenhagen. It was a shelter for men who had no housing. While living at the Men's Home, Peter had time on his hands. He began to visit a brothel located on Fazanvej in Copenhagen. This brothel was run as a small massage clinic. It was there that he met a woman named Marianne Peterson. Marianne was 36 years old. She was an early retiree and worked at the brothel as a sex worker to earn money. Marianne had been a widow for about a year. Her husband, who had been a painter, had passed away. Before his death, they had started the massage clinic together. Marianne had 2 sons. Their names were Brian and Dennis. Brian was 12 years old, and Dennis was 10. They all lived together in a house on Nørregaardsvej 26 in Rødovre, another suburb of Copenhagen. Peter and Marianne began a romantic relationship. He started spending more and more time at her house in Rødovre. Eventually, he moved out of the Men's Home and went to live with Marianne, Brian, and Dennis in their home. To the outside world, they looked like a new family. But inside the house, there were problems. Peter and Marianne argued often. In the middle of June 2000, a small event triggered a much larger one. On the night of June 16th, Marianne was talking on the telephone. Peter was nearby, and he heard her speaking. He thought she was speaking in a sweet or flirtatious way to another man. This made Peter very angry. He confronted her about the phone call. An argument started between them. The argument quickly became physical. It began in the bedroom, on the double bed where Marianne and Peter slept. During the fight, Peter used his hands. He grabbed Marianne and used force on her neck. He broke her neck. Marianne died instantly. The two boys, Brian and Dennis, were in the house. They heard the noise from the fight. They came into the bedroom to see what was happening. They saw their mother on the bed. They saw Peter standing there. Peter knew that the boys had seen what he did. He decided that they could not be left alive to tell anyone. He grabbed the boys. Using his bare hands again, he broke each of their necks, one after the other. He killed them both. All three were dead in the bedroom. Now Peter was alone in the house with 3 dead bodies. His first action was to hide the evidence of what had just happened. He took the bodies of Marianne and the 2 boys and put them somewhere out of sight. He placed them inside freezers that were in the home. The bodies stayed there for the next few days. 3 days later, on June 19, 2000, Peter began to carry out the next part of his plan. He went to a large store called Metro in the town of Glostrup. He needed tools and supplies. At the store, he bought several specific items. He bought a sharp axe. He bought a pair of rubber gloves. He bought a number of strong plastic bags. He also bought cleaning agents like bleach and soap. He paid for the items and drove back to the house on Norrgardsvej. Back at the house, he took the bodies out of the freezers. He began the difficult and gruesome work of cutting them into smaller pieces. He used the axe he had bought. He also used other tools that were in the house, like knives and possibly an angle grinder. He did this work in 2 different places. He dismembered the first body in the basement of the house. He dismembered the other 2 bodies in the garage. The floors in both places became covered in blood. He worked carefully to cut the bodies into parts that would fit inside the plastic bags he had bought. After he had finished cutting the bodies into pieces, he put all the parts into the plastic bags. He sealed the bags. Now he had to get rid of them. He put the bags into large trash containers that were placed on the street outside the house for bulk waste collection. He knew that the trash would be picked up and taken to a large incineration plant where it would be burned. He put some of the bags in these containers. But he did not stop there. He wanted to make sure the body parts were spread out so they would never be found together. He got into Marianne's car, a silver Ford Mondeo. He drove around to different areas in Zealand, the island where Copenhagen is located. He stopped at various public trash containers and dumped smaller bags of body parts inside them. He made sure the parts were scattered over a wide area. With the bodies gone, Peter had to explain the disappearance of Marianne and the boys. He came up with a simple story. He told people that the family had decided to go on a vacation. To make this story seem real, he wrote a note and put it on the front door of the house. The note said that the family was away on a trip. He thought this would stop anyone from worrying or coming to look for them. For a while this worked. Marianne had an older stepson whose name has not been made public. He was the son of Marianne's late husband from a previous relationship. He tried to call Marianne on her mobile phone. He also tried to call the boys on their phones. No one answered. He tried calling for several days, from late June into the beginning of July. He became very worried. On July 3, 2000, he decided to go to the house on Norrgardsvej to check on them. When he arrived, he saw the note on the door saying they were on vacation. But the way the note was written seemed strange to him. The words did not sound like something Marianne would write. This made him even more concerned. Because he was so worried, he decided to enter the house. He went inside. What he saw alarmed him immediately. The house was not tidy. The furniture had been moved away from the walls, as if someone had been cleaning or moving heavy things. There was trash and rubbish lying around in different rooms. He went into the bathrooms. In both toilets, he saw vomit that had not been cleaned up. Then he went down to the basement. There, he noticed a strange and unpleasant smell that he could not explain. He did not know what the smell was. He knew that something was terribly wrong. He left the house and went directly to the police. He filed a missing persons report for Marianne, Brian, and Dennis. After the stepson filed the report, the police began their work. They went to the house to search it. At first, everything seemed normal, but then the police officers started to look more closely. They noticed small, dark spots on the floors and walls. They tested these spots. The tests showed that the spots were blood. They found blood stains in Marianne's bed. They found blood in her car. They found traces of blood in the basement, where the stepson had noticed the strange smell. In the bathroom, they found blood between the tiles on the wall. In the kitchen, they found a chopping board and a blender. On these items, they also found traces of blood. The police needed to speak to Peter London. They knew he was Marianne's boyfriend. They went to his address, which was still listed as the house in Rodovra. They found him there or nearby. The police asked him where the family was. Peter repeated his story calmly. He told them that Marianne and the boys were on holiday. He said that he was just staying at the house to paint it while they were away. The police did not believe him. The evidence they had found pointed to something violent. On July 5, 2000, only 2 days after the missing persons report was filed, the police made an arrest. They took Peter London into custody. They formally charged him with the murder of Marianne Peterson and her 2 sons, Brian and Dennis. A judge ordered that he be held in detention for 4 weeks while the police continued their investigation. After Peter London was arrested on July 5, 2000, the police investigation moved into a new and more intense phase. They now had a suspect in custody, and they could focus on gathering all the physical evidence from the house on Norrgardsvej. The police technicians went through the property very carefully. They treated the entire house as a crime scene. What they found inside was horrifying. In the basement and the garage, they saw marks on the concrete floor. There were many cut marks, showing that something very sharp and powerful had been used there. They counted about 100 visible cut marks on the floor of the garage alone. This told them that an axe or a similar tool had been used repeatedly. The police also found a shed outside the house. Inside the shed, there was a freezer. It looked clean, but when the technicians tested it, they found traces of blood inside. They knew that bodies had been kept there. The police also searched the house for any clues about what tools were used. They found receipts from the Metro store in Glostrup. The receipts showed that on June 19, 2000, Peter London had bought an axe, rubber gloves, plastic bags, and strong cleaning products. This purchase, made just days after the family disappeared, was a very important piece of evidence. It showed that he had planned how to get rid of the bodies. A deputy chief inspector from the police, Niels Kjaller, spoke to the press about what they had found. He told them that both the basement and the garage looked like slaughterhouses. He explained that Peter had tried very hard to clean up all the blood and erase his tracks, but he had not been successful. The police scientists could still find the evidence. For the first 3 weeks after his arrest, Peter London stuck to his story that the family was on vacation. But the evidence against him was growing. The police found blood, they found the receipts, and they could place him at the house at the time of the disappearances. Finally, after 3 weeks in custody, Peter changed his story. He gave the police a new explanation for what happened. In this new story, Peter claimed that on the night between June 16th and 17th, he was in the house. He said he heard screams coming from the basement. He went down to the basement to see what was wrong. When he got there, he said he found the 2 boys, Brian and Dennis, lying on the floor. He claimed they were dead. He said that their mother, Marianne, was also in the basement. He claimed she was unconscious because she had taken drugs. Peter told the police that he believed Marianne had stabbed and killed her own sons. He said this made him very angry. He began to hit Marianne. He said he did not hit her seriously, but she died shortly after anyway. He said he did not call the police because he was afraid. He thought that because of his past conviction for killing his mother in America, the police would never believe his story about Marianne killing the boys. So, he said, he decided to cut up the bodies and get rid of them himself. The police did not believe this new story. It did not match the evidence they had found. For example, their forensic evidence showed that one of the boys had died in the basement, not both of them. They also found it very hard to believe that Marianne could have killed her two sons. Peter's story seemed like a lie to cover up his own actions. On October 10, 2000, about 3 months after his arrest, Peter London changed his story for a third and final time. He decided to tell the truth about what happened. He confessed to killing all 3 of them. He explained to the police exactly what had happened on that night. He said he had argued with Marianne because she was speaking sweetly to another man on the phone. The fight turned violent. He killed her on the bed by breaking her neck with his bare hands. Then her 2 sons came into the room. He killed them the same way, one after the other, because they had seen what he did to their mother. He then explained how he had bought the tools, dismembered the bodies, and scattered the parts in trash containers all over the island. Even with his confession, the police had a huge problem. They had no bodies. Peter London had disposed of the remains so effectively that they might never be found. He told the police he had put most of the bags in the bulk waste containers outside the house. Those containers had been picked up by the garbage trucks and taken to a large incineration plant called Vestforbränding. The garbage there was burned to create energy. The police calculated that about 10,000 metric tons of garbage had been delivered around that time. That is roughly 22 million pounds of trash. They searched through as much of it as they could, but they never found any of the body parts. Peter also said he had driven around and put smaller bags in public trash cans. The police searched many areas. They searched a large landfill in Holmostrup near the town of Nest. They also worked with the Danish Emergency Management Agency to search a large, wooded area called Vestvolden. They searched for months, but they never found any trace of Marianne, Brian, or Dennis. Their bodies have never been recovered to this day. While searching for the bodies, the police also looked into Peter's father, Ole London. They got a warrant to search his apartment on Strandvej 201 in Hellerup, a wealthy area north of Copenhagen. During that search, the police found several items that belonged to Marianne Peterson. These were personal belongings like jewelry or small valuables. Ole was arrested and charged with theft. He had stolen these items from the house on Norregardsvej, either before or after the murders. As the police investigation continued, Peter London was held in a prison called Vridsløselil, waiting for his trial. Prison life was not safe for him. Other inmates knew what he had done to Marianne and her 2 young sons. On July 27, 2000, just a few weeks after his arrest, he was attacked. Several inmates came to his cell. One of them hit him with an iron tube. The attack broke his nose. He had to receive medical treatment. This was the first of several attacks he would face in prison. The trial of Peter London began on March 5, 2001. It was held at the Østre which is a high court in Denmark. The case was heard by a jury. There were 12 jurors and 3 professional judges. The case had received enormous attention from the Danish media. It was one of the most talked about crimes in the country. At the start of the trial, the lead judge spoke directly to the jurors. He warned them that they had probably read and heard a lot about the case in the news over the past 8 months. He told them that they had to forget everything they had heard outside the courtroom. They had to base their decision only on the evidence and testimony presented during the trial. During the trial, Peter London continued to insist that he did not mean to kill anyone. He said the deaths were an accident that happened during the fight. His lawyer, Bjørn Lund Hansen, argued the same thing. He told the court that Peter's actions were spontaneous and impulsive, not planned. The prosecutor, a state attorney named Erik Merlung, disagreed completely. He argued that Peter London was guilty of intentional murder. He pointed to the evidence: the fight over the phone call, the killing of the two boys who were witnesses, and the careful, methodical way he had bought tools and disposed of the bodies. The prosecutor asked the jury to sentence Peter London to life in prison. The jury listened to all the evidence. They did not believe Peter's claim that the killings were an accident. After 10 days of court hearings on March 15, 2001, the jury and the judges delivered their verdict. They found Peter London guilty of the intentional murder of Mary Ann Peterson and her two sons, Brian and Dennis. He was also found guilty of theft from the house. Then, they had to decide the punishment. The jurors and judges voted. All 24 votes were for life imprisonment. The sentence was unanimous. When he heard the verdict, Peter London asked for a moment to think. He had the right to appeal the sentence to the Supreme Court, but he decided not to. A few months later, on June 7, 2002, Peter's father, Ole London, also faced justice. He stood trial for stealing Mary Ann Peterson's belongings. The judge, Jess Skeeler, said that the theft was serious. Even though Ole was old and might normally get a lighter sentence like community service, the judge decided that prison was the right punishment because of the connection to such a terrible crime. Ole London was sentenced to 4 months in prison. The case also caused a political debate. Many people asked why the police had not kept a watchful eye on Peter London after he was deported from the U.S. A member of Parliament, Eva K.J.R. Hansen, asked the Minister of Justice, Frank Jensen, to explain why no one was watching him. The minister investigated and then gave an answer. He explained that when London arrived, the U.S. authorities told the Danish police he was coming. But because London had no outstanding warrants in Denmark, and his record was from another country, the police treated him like any other citizen. They did not have the legal right to watch him all the time without a reason. The police in his local area were told about his past, and they were told to be aware of him if they ever came into contact with him. But no special surveillance was set up. The minister admitted that in principle, he was against the idea of systematically monitoring former convicts who were not suspected of any new crime. After the trial, Peter London was sent to serve his life sentence. He was held in different prisons over the years, including the high-security state prison of East Jutland. He was often kept in the institution of Herstedvester, which is a special facility for prisoners who need psychiatric help. While in prison, he continued to be involved in violent incidents. In February 2002, he was attacked again by fellow inmates. This time, he was hit on the head with a frying pan. He later sued the prison for compensation for his injuries and was awarded a small amount of money, just 510 Danish kroner. London also had problems with drugs in prison. In August 2006, guards found 92.7 grams of cannabis in his cell. He was sentenced to an extra 40 days in prison for this. In April 2012, he was sentenced to another 10 days for having more cannabis and 4 amphetamine pills in his cell. In 2012, he was also accused of being the leader of a smuggling operation that brought cannabis and other drugs into the institution of Herstedvester, but it is not clear if he was formally charged and convicted for this. Despite being in prison for life, Peter London has had personal relationships. He has been married several times while incarcerated. He married his first wife, Tina, while in prison in the U.S. After he was convicted in Denmark, he married a woman named Marianne Poulsen in the prison chapel on September 28, 2008. But just 11 days later, he filed for divorce. Marianne told the media that he had lied to her about having another girlfriend. In May 2011, he married a third woman named Bettina. They were together for several years, but the marriage ended in October 2017. Over the years, London has tried to change his identity. In November 2011, he legally changed his name from Peter London to Niels Schaffner. He later changed it again, first to Bjarne Skaunborg and then to Thomas Christian Olesen. He has also tried to fight back against people who spoke publicly about him. He sued a journalist who called him a psychopath in a newspaper article. The court ruled that the journalist's statement was acceptable because London was a clear example of a deviant person. In 2008, the leader of a political party, Pia Kjaersgaard, called him as callous as you can possibly be on a morning television show. London sued her for defamation, asking for 100,000 kroner. In March 2010, a court dismissed his case and said Kjaersgaard's comment was fair, given the extremely serious crimes he had committed. In 2014, he sued two TV hosts for accusing him of smuggling drugs in prison. The court also dismissed this case and ordered London to pay the TV hosts' legal costs. The media has continued to show interest in the case. In 2001, a newspaper planned to help London write his memoir, but the plan was dropped. In 2002, a TV program used psychics to try to find the bodies of Marianne and her sons. They searched in several places but found nothing. In 2003, a book was published about the case, analyzing the crime, the investigation, and the media coverage. In 2009, London himself published an autobiography called A Murderer's Confessions. In the book, he talked about his childhood and his life in prison. After the trial, a small and unusual group was formed by a few people. They called themselves the National Association for the Execution of Peter London. They did not want to bring back the death penalty for all crimes. They just wanted the Danish parliament to pass a special law that would allow the death penalty to be used for Peter London alone. This group had no power, and their idea never went anywhere. It just showed how much anger and horror the case had caused in the country. Peter London remains in prison today, serving his life sentence. Because it is a life sentence, there is no set date for his release. He will only be freed if he is ever pardoned or if a court decides he is no longer a danger to society, which is very unlikely. Marianne Peterson, Brian, and Dennis never received a proper burial. Their bodies were never found, and they were never laid to rest. The story of what Peter London did to that family became one of the most infamous and horrifying crimes in modern Danish history, and it ended with a man spending the rest of his life behind bars. Story 5. Jens Soering was born on August 1st, 1966, in the city of Bangkok, which is the capital of Thailand. His father, Klaus Soering, was a German citizen who worked as a diplomat for the German government. His job was to represent Germany in other countries. Because of this work, the Soering family did not stay in one place for a very long time. They lived in different countries as Klaus was sent to different posts around the world. Jens grew up in a world of embassies and international travel, but he was always considered a German citizen. When Jens was about 11 years old, in the year 1977, his father's diplomatic career brought the family to the United States of America. They settled in the state of Georgia, in a city called Atlanta. This was a big change for a young boy who had been living in Thailand. He had to learn a new culture and a new way of life in the American South. He attended a private school in Atlanta called the Lovett School. This school was for students from families who had money. Jens was a smart student and did well in his classes. He was known by his teachers and classmates as a bright and polite young man. He graduated from the Lovett School in 1984, when he was 18 years old. After graduating from high school, Jens decided to continue his education. He wanted to go to a good university. He chose the University of Virginia, which is a well-known and respected school located in a town called Charlottesville, Virginia. This was another new place for him, different from the big city of Atlanta. He began his studies there in the fall of 1984. He was interested in many subjects, including literature and philosophy. He was a serious student who spent a lot of time reading and thinking. During his first year at the University of Virginia, Jens met a fellow student who would change the course of his life. Her name was Elizabeth Haysom. Everyone called her Liz. She was a year older than Jens. Liz was born in Canada, but had grown up in many different places around the world, much like Jens. Her father, Derek Haysom, was a successful businessman, and her mother, Nancy Haysom, came from a wealthy and prominent family. The Haysoms lived in a large, expensive house in a nice area called Boonesboro, near the city of Lynchburg, Virginia, which was not too far from the university. Jens and Liz quickly became friends. They had a lot in common. They both came from international backgrounds. They were both very intelligent and well-read. They both felt like they might be a little different from the other American students around them. They enjoyed having deep conversations about books, movies, and life. Their friendship soon turned into a romantic relationship. They became a couple on campus. Jens was very taken with Liz. He found her to be fascinating, exciting, and very sophisticated. She seemed to have a very strong personality and often took the lead in their relationship. As they spent more time together, Liz began to tell Jens about her family life. She did not describe it as happy. She told him that she had many problems with her parents, especially with her mother, Nancy. She said that her parents were very strict and that they often fought with her. She made it sound like her home life was very difficult and painful for her. She told Jens that she felt trapped and controlled by them. Jens listened to her and felt sorry for her. He wanted to protect her and help her. He believed everything she told him. At this time, in late 1984 and early 1985, Jens was an 18-year-old student who was deeply in love with his girlfriend. He was living a normal life on a college campus, going to classes and dreaming about his future, not knowing what that future would actually hold. In March 1985, about 6 months after Jens Soering and Elizabeth Haysom first met at the University of Virginia, something terrible happened in the Haysom family home. The house was located in the Boonesboro area near Lynchburg, Virginia. Inside that house lived Elizabeth's parents, Derek and Nancy Haysom. Derek was 72 years old. Nancy was 54 years old. They were both found dead in their home. The way they were killed was very violent. Derek Haysom had been stabbed many times. Nancy Haysom had also been stabbed many times. Her throat had been cut. The scene inside the house was bloody and shocking. Whoever killed them had used a lot of force. The murders happened on a weekend, but their bodies were not found right away. A family friend discovered them a few days later, on March 30th, 1985. The police were called to the house. They began to investigate, but at first they had very few clues. They did not know who had done this. At the time of the murders, Jens and Elizabeth were not at the university. They had left campus. After the bodies were found, the police started asking questions. They learned about Elizabeth Haysom, the daughter of the dead couple. They wanted to talk to her. They also learned about her boyfriend, Jens Soering. But Jens and Elizabeth were not easy to find. They had left Virginia. They had left the state. They were not coming back. For about 6 months after the murders, Jens and Elizabeth stayed hidden. They did not go back to their normal lives. They traveled to different places. Eventually, they made their way to Europe. They ended up in England. They settled in London, which is a very big city where it is easy to get lost. They did not use their real names. They created false identities. They used fake passports and other fake documents to live there. They told no one who they really were. They wanted to disappear completely. While living in London under these fake names, Jens and Elizabeth needed money to survive. They did not have jobs. They found a way to get money that was against the law. They started writing fake checks. A check is a piece of paper that tells a bank to pay money to someone. Jens and Elizabeth wrote checks using their fake names, but the bank accounts did not have enough money in them. They also used fake credit cards. They tricked stores and banks into giving them money and goods. They did this many times. Over time, they stole more than $5,000 this way. This was a lot of money in 1986. Their fraud crimes drew attention. The police in London began to notice that someone was using fake checks. They started to investigate. On April 30th, 1986, the London police caught up with them. Jens and Elizabeth were arrested. At first, the arrest was only for the fraud and for using false papers. They were taken to a police station. They were questioned. They had to explain who they really were. Once they were in police custody, their real identities were discovered. The London police found out that they were not the people whose names were on the fake documents. They were Jens Soring and Elizabeth Haysom. The police in Virginia had been looking for them for a year. Now the London police knew who they had in their jail. They contacted the authorities in Virginia. They also contacted the American police, the FBI, and because Jens was German, they contacted West German authorities as well. Many different law enforcement officers came to question Jens and Elizabeth in London. They wanted to know about the murders in Virginia. During these interrogations, Jens Soring began to talk. He spoke to British police officers. He spoke to American police officers. He spoke to German officials. He spoke to more than one person. And in these conversations, he confessed to the murders of Derek and Nancy Haysom. He told them that he had killed Elizabeth's parents. He gave details about how he did it. He said that he went into their house and stabbed them. He confessed multiple times to multiple different authorities. Elizabeth Haysom was also questioned. She did not confess to killing her parents, but she did talk about what happened. She told the police that she had asked Jens to kill them. She explained that she wanted her parents dead and that she convinced Jens to do it for her. She said that she drove him to their house and waited for him while he went inside. She admitted that she helped plan the murders. She helped make them happen, even though she was not the one holding the knife. After their arrest in London, both Jens and Elizabeth had to face the question of what would happen next. They were in England, but the crime they were accused of happened in America. The American authorities wanted them to be sent back to Virginia to stand trial. This process is called extradition. Elizabeth Haysom made a decision quickly. She agreed to be sent back to Virginia. She did not fight the extradition. She waived her right to a hearing and was sent to the United States to face charges. Jens Soring made a different decision. He decided to fight against being sent back. He did not want to go to Virginia. His lawyers argued that if he was sent back, he might be put on trial for murder and possibly sentenced to death. They argued that waiting to be executed, sometimes for many years, causes extreme mental suffering. They called this the death row phenomenon. They said that sending someone to a place where they might face this was a form of cruel treatment. Jens's case went to a very important court in Europe, the European Court of Human Rights. On July 7, 1989, the court agreed with Jens's lawyers. They said that sending him to Virginia, where he could face the death row phenomenon, would be wrong under European law. After this court decision, the American authorities in Bedford County, Virginia, where the murders happened, had to make a choice. They wanted Jens Soring in their jail to stand trial. So they made a promise. They promised that if Jens was sent back, they would not ask for the death penalty. They would not try to have him executed. With this promise in place, the legal reason to stop his extradition was gone. Jens Soring was finally sent back to Virginia on January 12, 1990. He had been in jail in England for almost 4 years. Now he was back in the United States to face trial for 2 murders. After Jens Soring was extradited back to Virginia in January 1990, the legal process against him moved forward. Elizabeth Haysom had already been in Virginia for some time. She had made a decision about how to handle her case. She chose to plead guilty to the charges against her. Pleading guilty means she admitted in court that she was responsible for her part in the crimes. She did not have a trial. Instead, she agreed to cooperate with the prosecutors. Her cooperation meant she would testify against Jens Soring in his trial. In exchange for her plea and her testimony, she received a sentence of 90 years in prison. This was 2 sentences of 45 years each, one for each of her parents' murders, and they would run one after the other. Jens Soring's trial began later in 1990. He was charged with 2 counts of first-degree murder. First-degree murder means the killing was planned in advance. The prosecutors in the case said that Jens had planned the murders with Elizabeth and then carried them out himself. They said he was the one who walked into the Haysom home and stabbed Derek and Nancy to death. Jens pleaded not guilty to both charges. He told the court that he did not kill Elizabeth's parents. His lawyers explained why he had confessed to the police in London 5 years earlier. They said he made a false confession. They argued that he confessed to protect Elizabeth. He believed that because his father was a German diplomat, he might have diplomatic immunity. Diplomatic immunity means someone cannot be prosecuted in another country. Jens thought that if he confessed, the police would stop looking at Elizabeth and he would eventually be protected and released. He did not understand that diplomatic immunity does not work that way for the child of a diplomat. He was wrong. The trial lasted several weeks. Many people testified. The most important witness for the prosecution was Elizabeth Haysom. She took the stand and told the jury her version of events. She said that she had asked Jens to kill her parents. She said she drove him to their house on the night of the murders and waited for him. She described how they had planned it together. Her testimony was very damaging for Jens. The jury heard her speak in detail about how the murders happened according to her. The prosecution also presented physical evidence. The most important piece of evidence was a sock print. At the crime scene, investigators had found a bloody mark on the floor. It looked like it was made by someone wearing a sock. The prosecution had an expert witness named Robert Hallett. He was not a trained expert in footprints, but he told the jury that he could match this sock print to a sock that belonged to Jens Soring. He said it was a perfect match. This was a key piece of evidence that linked Jens directly to the bloody scene. Jens's defense lawyers tried to show that the evidence was not strong. They pointed out that there were no witnesses to the murders except Elizabeth, who had already admitted she was involved in planning them. They argued that she had reasons to lie and put all the blame on Jens. They also tried to cast doubt on the sock print evidence. But the jury listened to the expert witness and to Elizabeth's detailed testimony. The judge in the case was named William M. Sweeney. During the trial, some information came to light that raised questions. It was discovered that Judge Sweeney personally knew Nancy Haysom's brother, who was Elizabeth's uncle. He had also presided over Elizabeth's own court proceedings before Jens's trial. This created a potential conflict of interest. Jens's lawyers later argued that the judge should not have been on the case. However, during the trial itself, this did not stop the proceedings. Another problem for the defense was Jens's own lawyer, Richard Neaton. He was supposed to defend Jens vigorously, but later, after the trial, it became known that Neaton had a serious drug problem at the time he was representing Jens. He was struggling with addiction to prescription drugs. His judgment and his ability to focus on the case may have been affected by this. Years later, Neaton was disciplined by the state and eventually lost his law license, though for reasons not directly connected to the Soring case. After hearing all the evidence, the jury had to make a decision. They deliberated and then came back with a verdict. They found Jens Soring guilty of both counts of first-degree murder. The judge then sentenced him to prison. Because the prosecutors had promised not to seek the death penalty, the sentence was life in prison. Jens received 2 life sentences, to be served one after the other. This meant he would have to spend the rest of his life in prison with no chance of release for many decades. He was sent to the Buckingham Correctional Center, a state prison in Dillwyn, Virginia. After the trial was over, Jens Soring began a long fight to prove he was innocent. For nearly 30 years, he filed appeals and asked for new hearings. He asked for parole 14 different times. Parole is when a prisoner is released early under supervision. Each time, his requests were denied. He also asked multiple Virginia governors for a pardon. A pardon is when a governor forgives a crime or declares someone innocent. All of these requests were also denied for many years. During his decades in prison, Jens did not stop working on his case. He also wrote books. He wrote about his life in prison. He wrote about religion. He had converted from Buddhism to Roman Catholicism while incarcerated. His book, called The Convict Christ, was about criminal justice and faith. It was so well received that it won an award from the Catholic Press Association of North America in 2007. He wrote several other books as well. He became known as a thoughtful and religious prisoner. As time passed, new developments occurred. In 2009, many years after the trial, DNA testing was done on evidence from the crime scene. DNA technology had improved a lot since 1985. Investigators looked at 42 different pieces of evidence. They tested for DNA that might belong to the killer. Of the 42 samples, 31 were too small or too damaged to give any result. But 11 samples did produce results. Those 11 samples contained DNA. None of that DNA matched Jens Soering. None of it matched Elizabeth Haysom either. The DNA belonged to unknown people. This was a significant finding. It did not prove Jens was innocent, because his DNA might not have been left at the scene even if he was there. But it also meant there was no scientific proof linking him to the crime. Over the years, people began to have doubts about the case. One of the original investigators, a man named Chuck Reed, started to question whether the right person had been convicted. He had worked on the case in the 1980s. Later, after watching a documentary about the case called The Promise in 2016, his doubts grew stronger. He began to speak publicly about his concerns. In 2017, a very important person got involved. His name was Chip Harding. He was the sheriff of Albemarle County in Virginia. Sheriffs are top law enforcement officers in their counties. Sheriff Harding did his own investigation into the Soering case. He spent months looking at the old evidence and the new DNA results. He also looked at reports from other experts. An FBI profiler named Ed Sulzbach had reportedly looked at the case years earlier and concluded that the crime was likely committed by a woman who knew the victims. He reportedly suggested Elizabeth Haysom might have been the killer. The detective in charge at the time denied that any such profile was made, and it was never presented at trial. In May 2017, Sheriff Harding released a 19-page report. In this report, he stated his conclusion. He believed Jens Soering was innocent. He asked the governor of Virginia, Terry McAuliffe, to pardon Jens. Later that year, in September, Sheriff Harding held a press conference. He was joined by another investigator and 3 forensic scientists. All of them agreed that the new DNA evidence pointed away from Jens Soering. They urged the state to release him. International attention grew. On October 10, 2017, Jens had his 13th parole hearing. This hearing was different from the others. The German ambassador to the United States, Peter Wittig, attended the hearing. The former president of Germany, Christian Wolff, also came to show support. After the hearing, Ambassador Wittig spoke to the media. He said, "We are deeply convinced of the innocence of Jens Soering." This was a strong statement from a foreign government. Later that same month, another press conference was held. This time, a former Deputy Attorney General of Virginia named Gail Starling Marshall spoke. She announced that the Institute for Actual Innocence at the University of Richmond School of Law was supporting Jens's petition for a pardon. They based their support on the DNA evidence that excluded him. Despite all this attention and support, no pardon came. Governor McAuliffe left office without acting on the case. Jens remained in prison. His case continued to be discussed in the media. Documentaries were made about him. In 2016, a film called Killing for Love was released. It presented the case and raised questions about his guilt. A podcast about his case was also made, produced with the help of Amanda Knox, an American woman who was wrongly convicted of murder in Italy and later freed. Finally, in late 2019, the situation changed. The Virginia Parole Board reviewed the case again. They made a recommendation to the current governor, Ralph Northam. On November 25, 2019, Governor Northam announced that he was accepting the Parole Board's recommendation. Jens Soering would be released. Elizabeth Haysom would also be released at the same time. It is important to understand what this release meant. Jens was not given a pardon. He was not declared innocent by the state. Instead, he was released on parole. This is a conditional release. He would have to follow rules. But there was another condition. Because Jens is a German citizen and not an American citizen, he could not stay in the United States. He was turned over to U.S. Immigration and Customs Enforcement, which is known as ICE. They held him briefly and then deported him. He was put on a plane and sent back to Germany, the country of his citizenship. He arrived in Frankfurt, Germany, on December 17, 2019. He was 53 years old. He had spent nearly 30 years in American prisons. As a condition of his release, he is banned from ever entering the United States again. Elizabeth Haysom was also released at the same time. She is a Canadian citizen. She was also deported. She was sent to Canada. She had served about 30 years of her 90-year sentence. Like Jens, she is not allowed to return to the United States. After his return to Germany, Jens Soering became a public figure. He appeared on many German television talk shows. He gave interviews. He talked about his experience in the American justice system. He portrayed himself as a victim of a wrongful conviction. In Germany, there are laws that restrict what he can say. For legal reasons, he is not allowed to publicly accuse Elizabeth Haysom of being the actual killer. So he focuses his message on the failures of the police and the courts in Virginia. He has written more books. He has a contract with Netflix. In 2023, Netflix released a 4-part documentary series about the case called Till Murder Do Us Part, Soering vs. Haysom. The series included interviews with Jens, as well as old footage from the trials. Elizabeth Haysom did not participate in the series. Her cousin explained that Elizabeth's half-siblings had asked her to stop giving interviews about the case, and she had agreed to respect their wishes. The story of Jens Soering and Elizabeth Haysom, which began with a meeting at a university in 1984 and led to 2 violent deaths in 1985, finally reached its end with both of them living as free people again on different continents, forever linked by the crimes of the past.